We were driving to my son's house. My daughter leaned over and said, "Turn the car around." "Now." I did. Minutes later, I understood why she was terrified. I'm Rosemary Callahan, and at 64 years old, I thought I had my family figured out. I was dead wrong. What happened on that crisp October afternoon changed everything I believed about the people I'd raised, loved, and trusted for decades. By the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who share your last name. If you're watching this, please let me know in the comments where you're from, and whether you've ever discovered something about your family that made you question everything you thought you knew. Hit that like button and subscribe, because this story gets darker and more twisted than you can imagine. I need to start by painting the picture of my family, because without understanding these relationships, what happened that day won't make sense. After my husband Patrick died 4 years ago from complications following a stroke, I was left to navigate the complex dynamics between my 2 adult children alone. Patrick had always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over tensions and kept conversations civil during family gatherings. Without him, the cracks in our family foundation became impossible to ignore. My son Mitchell is 38, a real estate attorney who's built quite a name for himself here in Portland, Oregon. He's always been what you'd call a high achiever, valedictorian in high school, full scholarship to University of Oregon, law degree from Lewis and Clark. Mitchell married his college sweetheart, a woman named Vanessa, who comes from old Portland money. They live in a stunning craftsman home in the Pearl District that was featured in Portland Monthly magazine 2 years ago. They have twin boys, Connor and Blake, who are 11 years old, and everything about their life looks perfect from the outside. My daughter Bridget is 35, and she couldn't be more different from her brother. Where Mitchell pursued prestige and financial success, Bridget followed her heart into social work. She's a victim advocate at the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office, working primarily with domestic violence cases. She makes about a quarter of what Mitchell earns and lives in a small bungalow in the Selwood neighborhood that she's slowly renovating herself. She's been with her boyfriend Marcus, a high school teacher, for about 6 years, though they've never felt pressured to marry. The differences between my children have always created tension, but after Patrick's death, that tension escalated into something much more problematic. Mitchell began inserting himself into my finances and daily life in ways that felt both caring and controlling. He'd show up unannounced to check on me, constantly questioned my spending decisions, and started making comments about how I needed to be more careful about my financial future. "Mom, you're 64 years old and living alone in a house that's too big for you," became his frequent refrain. "Dad's life insurance won't last forever if you keep spending the way you do. You need to start thinking practically about your future." Bridget, on the other hand, seemed to trust my judgment completely. When I mentioned wanting to take a photography class, she encouraged me. When I talked about maybe getting a small dog for companionship, she offered to help me research breeds. Where Mitchell saw problems that needed his management, Bridget saw a competent adult making her own choices. This fundamental difference in how they viewed my capabilities became the source of increasingly heated arguments between them. Mitchell would make comments about Bridget's naive approach to my welfare, while Bridget would accuse Mitchell of being controlling and disrespectful of my autonomy. The contrast became especially clear when I mentioned wanting to get a small dog for companionship. Bridget immediately offered to help me research breeds and visit local shelters. Mitchell's response was swift and dismissive. "Mom, at your age, a pet is just another responsibility you don't need. What happens when you can't take care of it properly? What if you fall trying to walk it, or forget to feed it? You need to be realistic about your limitations." His words stung more than I wanted to admit. The implication that I was too old, too fragile, too forgetful to care for a simple companion animal felt like a judgment on my entire capacity for independent living. The situation reached a breaking point about 8 months ago when Mitchell convinced me to meet with his financial advisor, a polished man named Theodore Brennan who managed portfolios for several high-net-worth families in Portland. Theodore presented a compelling case for why I needed to restructure my finances for maximum protection and growth. "Mrs. Callahan," Theodore explained during our meeting in his downtown office, "your current financial setup leaves you vulnerable to several risks. Market volatility, healthcare costs, potential cognitive decline. These are all factors we need to plan for proactively. He recommended transferring most of my assets into a family trust that would provide me with monthly distributions while protecting the principal from poor decision-making or predatory individuals who might take advantage of an elderly widow. Mitchell was enthusiastic about this plan. "Mom, this is exactly what Dad would have wanted," he said. "He always worried about leaving you vulnerable to financial exploitation. This way, you'll have guaranteed income, but the bulk of the estate will be protected for your future needs and eventually for the grandchildren." When I mentioned the trust idea to Bridget during one of our weekly coffee dates, her reaction was immediate and strong. "Mom, that sounds like they're trying to take control of your money while making it seem like they're protecting you. You're completely mentally sharp, you've been managing finances successfully for decades, and you don't need someone else making decisions about your own money." But Mitchell's arguments seemed so logical, so caring. He painted pictures of elderly people losing their life savings to scams, making poor investment decisions due to cognitive decline, or being manipulated by unscrupulous caregivers. "I've seen it happen in my legal practice, Mom. Smart people who just weren't prepared for the vulnerabilities that come with aging." The trust documents Theodore prepared were complex, filled with legal language that was difficult to understand. Mitchell assured me that everything was standard estate planning language, designed to protect my interests while ensuring proper management of the assets. "The beauty of this arrangement," he explained, "is that you'll never have to worry about financial stress again. Everything will be handled professionally." What I didn't fully grasp at the time was that the trust structure gave Mitchell significant decision-making power over my finances, my living situation, and even my healthcare decisions. The monthly distributions I'd receive were substantial enough to cover my current lifestyle, but any major financial decisions would require Mitchell's approval as the primary trustee. Bridget asked pointed questions about the specifics of the trust, but when she requested to review the documents herself, Mitchell became defensive. "Bridget, this is complex legal and financial planning. Unless you've suddenly developed expertise in estate law, I don't think your input is particularly valuable here." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, and it sparked one of the worst arguments my children had ever had. Bridget accused Mitchell of manipulating me and trying to control my life. Mitchell accused Bridget of being jealous of his success and trying to interfere in matters she didn't understand. "Maybe if you'd made something of yourself instead of wasting your education on bleeding heart social work, you'd understand the importance of proper financial planning," Mitchell said during that argument, his voice cold and cutting. Bridget's response was equally harsh. "Maybe if you'd developed some empathy instead of just focusing on accumulating wealth, you'd understand that Mom is a capable adult who doesn't need you controlling her life." I tried to mediate between them, but honestly, Mitchell's expertise and confidence were persuasive. He seemed to have thought through every possible scenario, every potential risk. Bridget's concerns felt more emotional than logical, more based on principle than practical considerations. 3 months ago, I signed the trust documents. Mitchell was present for the signing, along with Theodore and a notary. The process felt formal and important, and Mitchell seemed genuinely pleased that we'd secured my financial future properly. Bridget was devastated when I told her what I'd done. She didn't yell or argue, which somehow made her reaction worse. She just sat quietly for a long time, then said, "Mom, I hope I'm wrong about this, but I think you've just given Mitchell control over your life in ways you don't fully understand." Over the following weeks, subtle changes began. Mitchell started asking more detailed questions about my daily activities, my purchases, my plans. When I mentioned wanting to visit my sister in Phoenix for a week, he suggested that traveling alone at my age might not be wise. When I bought a new laptop computer, he questioned whether I really needed something so expensive. "The trust provides for your needs, Mom," he'd say when I mentioned any significant purchase. "But we need to be mindful of maintaining the principle for your long-term care needs." I began to feel like I needed permission for decisions I'd been making independently for decades. When I brought this up with Mitchell, he assured me that these were just temporary adjustments while we figured out the best distribution schedule for my needs. Bridget noticed the changes in my behavior and mood. "Mom, you seem stressed lately. Are you okay?" I found myself making excuses for Mitchell's increased involvement in my life, defending decisions that, in retrospect, I wasn't entirely comfortable with. "He's just being careful with the financial planning. It's actually nice to have someone else handling the complex stuff." But Bridget's trained eye for recognizing patterns of control and manipulation was picking up on things I was missing or choosing to ignore. As someone who worked with abuse victims daily, She understood how gradually and subtly controlling behavior could escalate. The incident that changed everything happened on a Sunday in October. Mitchell had invited me to dinner at his house to celebrate Connor and Blake's success in their fall soccer season. It was supposed to be a nice family gathering, just me, Mitchell, Vanessa, the boys, and Bridget. These family dinners had become less frequent since the trust situation, partly because the tension between Mitchell and Bridget made everyone uncomfortable. I had picked up Bridget from her house, as I often did for family events, since parking in Mitchell's neighborhood could be challenging, and it gave us time to catch up during the 25-minute drive across town. The autumn colors were beautiful that day, and I was looking forward to spending time with my grandchildren and hopefully having a peaceful family meal. Bridget had been quieter than usual during the drive. When I asked if everything was okay, she said she'd had a difficult week at work with a particularly challenging case involving an elderly woman who'd been financially exploited by her adult children. I didn't think much of it at the time, since Bridget often carried the emotional weight of her cases. As we turned into Mitchell's upscale neighborhood, with its perfect lawns and expensive cars, Bridget suddenly grabbed my arm. "Mom, turn the car around. Now!" My foot hovered over the brake pedal. The urgency in her voice cut through the afternoon calm like a scream. For a moment, I sat frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the autumn leaves blur past the windshield. Decades of maternal instinct warred with something I'd never heard in my daughter's voice before, raw terror. "What? Bridget, what's wrong? Please, just turn around. Trust me. We cannot go in there today." Her face had drained of all color, and her hands were trembling against my arm. This wasn't like Bridget at all. Even when dealing with the most horrific cases at work, she maintained a professional composure that I'd always admired. But right now, she looked like a child who'd seen something monstrous. "Bridget, you're scaring me. What's happening? Are the boys hurt? I'll explain everything, but please just turn around and drive away from here. Right now." I stared at Mitchell's house, visible through the trees ahead. Warm light glowing in the windows, probably Vanessa setting the table while the boys did homework upstairs. Everything looked so normal, so safe. But something in Bridget's voice, some primal fear I'd never heard before, made the decision for me. My hands shook as I did a U-turn at the next intersection, the tires squealing slightly on the asphalt. Whatever was waiting for us in that house, whatever Bridget had discovered, I chose to trust the daughter I'd underestimated for too long. "Okay," I said once we were several blocks away, pulling into the parking lot of a coffee shop we both knew. "Tell me what's going on." Bridget took several deep breaths before speaking, and what she told me next destroyed everything I thought I knew about my son and my family. "Mom, yesterday I got a call that changed everything. It was from Vanessa." This surprised me, since Bridget and Vanessa had never been particularly close. She was crying, almost hysterical, and she asked if we could meet privately. She said she had information about Mitchell that I needed to know. I felt a cold dread settling in my stomach. "What kind of information?" "Vanessa told me that Mitchell has been planning to have you declared mentally incompetent." The words hit me like a physical blow. She said he's been documenting what he calls concerning behaviors, times when you've forgotten minor details, instances of what he describes as poor judgment in your spending or social choices. I couldn't speak. The betrayal was so enormous, so calculated, that my mind couldn't immediately process it. "There's more, Mom. Vanessa said Mitchell has been consulting with a geriatric psychiatrist about the process for getting a court-ordered competency evaluation. His plan is to use that evaluation, combined with the trust documents you've already signed, to gain complete legal guardianship over you." That can't be true. Mitchell wouldn't. But even as I said it, pieces began falling into place with horrible clarity. Mitchell's increased scrutiny of my behavior. His comments about my need for protection from my own poor judgment. His insistence on the trust structure that gave him so much control. Vanessa said the plan was to move forward with the competency proceedings after today's dinner. Apparently, Mitchell arranged for Dr. Morrison, the geriatric psychiatrist, to be at the house today, introduced as a family friend. Dr. Morrison was going to conduct an informal assessment of your mental state during the dinner conversation. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to grip the steering wheel to steady them. Why would Vanessa tell you this? Why now? Because she finally realized what Mitchell was really doing, and she couldn't live with herself if she let it happen. She said she'd been going along with Mitchell's plans because she believed he was genuinely concerned about your welfare. But when she heard him on the phone with Theodore discussing how much money they could access once he had full guardianship, she understood that this wasn't about protecting you. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together with sickening clarity. Mitchell's concern about my financial future wasn't about my welfare. It was about his access to my assets. The trust hadn't been designed to protect me. It had been the first step in a plan to gain control over my entire life. Vanessa recorded some of their conversations, Bridget continued, pulling out her phone. She said she needed evidence because she knew no one would believe her otherwise. She played an audio file, and I heard Mitchell's voice clearly. The beauty of the competency route is that it's almost impossible to reverse once it's established. Even if Mom has moments of clarity, the legal presumption will be that she lacks the capacity to make major decisions. And with the trust already in place, I'll have both legal authority and financial control. Then Theodore's voice. How confident are you that Dr. Morrison will support the incompetency finding? Mitchell again, very confident. I've been documenting Mom's behavior for months. Times when she seemed confused, instances of what could be interpreted as poor judgment. Dr. Morrison understands what we're looking for. I had to grab Bridget's hand to stop the recording. My coffee had gone cold untouched, while my world collapsed around me. The hum of the espresso machine behind the counter suddenly sounded like static from a courtroom recording, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat. Stop, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I can't. I need a moment. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to grip the edge of the table to steady them. This wasn't just betrayal. This was calculated predation by someone who'd grown in my body, someone I'd nursed through fevers and celebrated at graduations. The Mitchell in that recording wasn't the son I'd raised. He was a stranger wearing my child's face. There's more, Bridget said gently. Vanessa also told me that Mitchell has been telling people that you're showing signs of dementia. He's been creating a narrative among your friends and neighbors that you're declining mentally, so that when he moves forward with guardianship proceedings, there will be witnesses who can testify to your supposed incompetence. I thought about recent interactions I'd had with neighbors, family friends, and even my doctor. How many of them had been influenced by Mitchell's carefully planted suggestions about my mental state. The most horrifying part, Bridget continued, is that Mitchell has already researched assisted living facilities. Vanessa found brochures in his office for memory care units. His plan is to move you into institutional care once he gains guardianship, which would give him complete control over your assets while eliminating your ability to challenge his decisions. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a misguided attempt to help. This was a systematic, long-term plan to steal my autonomy, my assets, and my freedom, orchestrated by my own son with the help of professional accomplices. Why didn't Vanessa come to me directly with this information? I asked. She was afraid you wouldn't believe her. Mitchell has been very careful to present himself as the devoted son, and she knew that accusing him of elder abuse would sound incredible. She also knew that if Mitchell found out she'd betrayed his plan, the consequences for her and the boys could be severe. I thought about my grandsons, Connor and Blake, and how this situation would affect them. They had no idea their father was planning to destroy their grandmother's life for financial gain. Vanessa is planning to file for divorce, Bridget added. She said she can't stay married to someone who would do this to his own mother. But she wanted to make sure you were protected first. We sat in that parking lot for another hour while Bridget showed me additional evidence Vanessa had gathered. Text messages between Mitchell and Theodore discussing timeline for the guardianship proceedings. Notes in Mitchell's handwriting documenting what he described as incidents of concerning behavior on my part. Draft legal documents for guardianship applications. The evidence was overwhelming and devastating. My son, whom I had trusted completely, had been planning to systematically destroy my independence and steal my assets under the guise of protecting me. Bridget, I am so sorry, I said, finally understanding how right she'd been about the trust situation. You tried to warn me, and I didn't listen. You don't need to apologize, Mom. Mitchell's manipulation was sophisticated and calculated. He knew exactly how to present his plan to make it seem caring and reasonable. That evening, I made a choice that surprised even myself. Instead of letting Bridget handle everything, I picked up my phone and called Patricia Henley myself. Ms. Henley, my name is Rosemary Callahan, and I need help stopping my son from stealing my life. The words felt strange in my mouth, but saying them out loud made them real. For too long, I'd let other people make decisions about my life. First Patrick, then Mitchell, even well-meaning Bridget. But this decision, this fight, was mine to lead. Patricia reviewed all the evidence we'd gathered, along with the trust documents I'd signed, with growing alarm. Rosemary, What your son was attempting constitutes elder financial abuse and could potentially involve fraud. The trust documents you signed may be voidable if we can prove you were misled about their true purpose and implications. She explained that Mitchell's plan to have me declared incompetent while he controlled my finances was a form of guardianship abuse that was unfortunately becoming more common as baby boomers aged with substantial assets. The good news is that you're clearly competent, you have documentation of the conspiracy against you, and you're taking action before the guardianship proceedings began. We can not only protect you from this scheme, but we can also potentially pursue criminal charges against the people involved. Patricia helped me understand my legal options for both defense and offense. We could revoke the trust, pursue criminal charges for attempted elder abuse, and take steps to protect my assets from future manipulation attempts. The confrontation with Mitchell was my idea. Patricia had advised waiting, building a stronger legal case first, but I couldn't sleep knowing what he'd planned for me. I called him myself and asked him to meet me at Patricia's office. When Mitchell walked into that conference room, confident and composed, I was the one who slid the evidence across the table. The recordings, the photographs of his handwritten notes, the communications with Theodore and Dr. Morrison. I laid it all out like cards in a poker game. I was finally ready to win. "Hello, Mitchell," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I think we need to talk about your plans for my future." His face went through a dozen expressions in the span of seconds: confusion, recognition, panic, and finally that calculating look I now recognized as his true face. "Mom, you don't understand," he started, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd heard so many times before. "Everything I've done has been to protect you from making decisions that could harm your financial security." I leaned forward, holding his gaze. "Mitchell, I want you to explain to me, in your own words, why you thought it was acceptable to plan my institutionalization so you could steal my money." The directness of the question hit him like a slap. For the first time in our conversation, he had no smooth answer, no rehearsed explanation. Just a long silence where I could see him calculating how much I actually knew. When he finally spoke, the mask came off completely. "You're 64 years old, and you're making emotional decisions that could destroy the financial legacy Dad worked his entire life to build. Someone needs to ensure that our family's wealth isn't frittered away on your sentimental whims." There it was, the truth I'd needed to hear. Not the loving concern of a devoted son, but the cold entitlement of someone who'd already spent my inheritance in his mind. Patricia intervened before the conversation could escalate further. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to inform you that we have documented evidence of conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, fraud, and attempted unlawful guardianship. We're prepared to pursue both civil and criminal remedies unless this situation is resolved immediately to Mrs. Callahan's satisfaction." The color drained from Mitchell's face as he realized the legal jeopardy he was facing. "This is ridiculous. I was trying to help my mother. By planning to have her declared incompetent and institutionalized so you could control her assets?" Patricia's voice was ice cold. "That's not help, Mr. Mitchell. That's abuse." Over the following days, with Patricia's help, we dismantled Mitchell's entire scheme. The trust was revoked, my assets were returned to my control, and I established new estate planning documents with multiple safeguards against future manipulation attempts. Theodore Brennan's involvement in the scheme cost him his financial advisor's license and resulted in an investigation by the State Securities Commission. Dr. Morrison faced an ethics investigation by the State Medical Board for his willingness to participate in a fraudulent competency evaluation. Mitchell's law practice suffered significant damage when word of his attempted elder abuse spread through Portland's legal community. Several clients left his firm, and he faced a disciplinary investigation by the Oregon State Bar. The personal consequences were even more devastating. Vanessa followed through with her divorce, gaining primary custody of Connor and Blake after presenting evidence of Mitchell's willingness to manipulate and abuse family members for financial gain. She was granted a restraining order that prevented Mitchell from having unsupervised contact with the boys after a court-appointed psychologist determined that his behavior indicated a pattern of manipulation and potential emotional abuse. 8 months later, I'm sitting in my backyard on a Sunday morning, watching a golden retriever puppy named Murphy chase butterflies through the flower beds I planted last spring. The registration form for my photography class sits on the patio table next to my coffee, already filled out and ready to mail. Next to it, plane tickets to Phoenix. I'm visiting my sister Helen next month, And this time I didn't ask anyone's permission. My new laptop sits open beside me, displaying the photo editing software I splurged on last week. Mitchell would have called it an unnecessary expense, but the joy on Murphy's face as he discovers a particularly interesting stick is worth every pixel of that expensive program. Bridget stops by most Sunday mornings now, usually bringing fresh bagels from the bakery near her house. We don't talk much about Mitchell anymore. There's nothing left to say that matters. Instead, we talk about her cases, my photography, whether Murphy needs puppy training classes, and what kind of garden fence might keep him from digging up my new roses. Sometimes I catch her watching me with a mixture of relief and something that might be pride. I think she's still amazed that I fought back, that I didn't crumble under the weight of Mitchell's betrayal. Sometimes I'm amazed too. The mailbox at the end of my driveway has my name on it. Just mine. The house is mine. The decisions about Murphy's veterinarian, my grocery budget, and whether to take that photography trip to Ireland next fall are all mine to make. When I wake up in the morning, no one is monitoring my mental capacity or questioning my judgment. No one is planning my future without my consent. It's a small freedom, maybe, but after coming so close to losing it, it feels enormous. Murphy bounds back toward me, his tongue hanging out, a flower petal stuck to his nose. I reach down to pet him, and he licks my hand with the kind of uncomplicated affection I'd forgotten existed. This is what choosing myself looks like. This is what victory feels like when you almost lose everything that matters.